So in between this discussion, I will be sharing the screen of assignment, and we will be discussing the different aspects during the sharing of this data, right? Okay, so in the previous lecture, we have basically outlined all the possible elements in our ER diagram. That is one part. Now, the next aspect of the conceptual data modeling is to understand basically how to identify these possible elements in a given text requirement, right? Because it is important to have this idea, this practice. It is important to have this practice that how you will be identifying or outlining the different elements in a text requirement. So because this is how we will be getting the details about different elements, right? So that we have, like in the previous lectures, we have discussed for basically database design, the requirements will be coming to the database designer in the form of text requirements, right? So let me share a simple document where we will be having these all these requirements in the form of text statements, right? So I hope this screen is visible to you. So in this typical text requirement, I will be reading it and I will be highlighting some of the components which are needs to be discussed, right? So primarily, this is how the requirements will be taken out from SRS. So like in the previous lecture, we have discussed that SRS will consist of all the possible requirements that needs to be designed into a software system. But among these requirements, there will be some requirements which will be related to the database design aspects, right? So the first step is, maybe first sub step is to take out all these requirements and simply share these requirements with a concerned person, and here concerned person will be the database designer. So let's take this scenario or data requirement 1, which says a company database keeps track of a company. So basically, this is something related to designing a database for a company where we will be keeping the records of employee, departments, and projects. So projects means projects on which these employees are working, and these projects will be managed by some department. So suppose that after requirement collection and data analysis phase, the database designer provides the following description of the mini world. So that's what I'm saying. So these all, so whatever points are written in the below part here, these will be taken out from the SRS, right? That's why it is referred as a database designer provides the following description of the mini world. Mini world means the requirements of a certain scenario. So the part mini world, the part of company that will be presented in the database. So basically, these all the requirements are taken out from SRS document, because these inputs are these information in SRS will be helping you as a database designer to design the database, right? And basically, the overall objective is what? Overall objective is to design this company database, right? So now, one by one, you can read it out and tries to identify the different entities. That is first part. Tries to identify the attributes of these entities, and third, if possible, try to identify or try to correlate these entities, right? Whatever entities we will be identifying. So let's read the first requirement. It says the company is organized into departments. So obviously department will be the first entity which we have identified. Now each department has unique name. It means it will be acting as an attribute. So let me color it with the different color. Yeah, that's better. So attributes I am coloring with this color, and other things will be different. So we have identified department, and for each department means your name will be basically attribute. So each department has let me wait, others some are trying to join. let me. I'm getting a call. Okay, so basically, okay, let me share again. Uh, so this department name will be unique and it will have some meaning. Similarly, it will have department number, which is again unique. So let me color it. Okay. Now after that, so each department has a unique name, unique number, and a particular employee who manages the department. So these three are the obvious attribute of the department entity. Similarly, we keep track of the start. We keep track of the start date. It means start date also will be a possible attribute. When so basically this attribute start date will basically indicate the employee when particular employee begins managing the department, something like that, right? Okay, so basically we will have dates thing and employee. A department may have several locations. So now it is very clear that so these first 3-4 attributes are basically single valued. We will have one name of department, one department number, and there will be one employee who will be managing. So employee number, and there will be start date. So these are so single valued, but it is saying that a department may have several locations. So several location means location will be a multi-valued attribute, right? So it should be clear with you that it is important to identify that for particular entity which attributes are single valued and which are multi-valued, right? So it is clear that for department these are the attributes. Now let's read the second requirement. A department controls a number of projects. So with this, you can identify that, okay, along with department, there is another entity which is called project, and there is relationship between department and project entity, because a department controls a number of projects. It means there is a relationship between department and project, and the relationship will be of what nature? You can respond. You can respond to the query. What is the relationship ratio or nature between department and project? Anyone answer? Post answer. I'm waiting for your answer. What is the nature of department and project? I'm asking. Yeah, someone posted. It is one stream. So which side it is M? It is project side. So one department will control more than one project, right? So okay, you can identify. Further, let me read. So a department controls a number of projects, each of which has a unique name. So it is talking about the projects. So it is talking about a project has a unique name. This is about attribute. Project has a name. Project has a number, project number, and similarly, it has a single location. So we have three possible attributes in project attribute entity, and all are single valued, right? Further, let me read. We store each. Now it is talking about employee. We store each employee name. So employee is the third possible entity, right? So each employee has name. So employee name is attribute. Social security number, then address, right? Then address, then salary, then its gender, then its birth date, right? These are the possible attributes. Now, along with it, an employee is assigned to one department. Now, so this statement indicates that there is a relationship between employee and department. And this relationship of what nature? Employee and department. What is the nature of relationship? Yes, you can respond. You can respond. What is the nature of relationship between employee and department? Is of what? 1:1. Ishan responded with 1:1. Yeah, it's correct. It's 1:1 because it is clearly written that an employee is assigned to one department. राइट. सो इसमें इंपॉर्टेंट आपको देखना है कि whenever we found such a statement like this, what is the term used to describe the relationship? It is saying an employee is assigned to one department. Similarly, when we are reading a department controls a number of projects, so here controls term is used to describe the relationship, right? Okay, let me read further. An employee is assigned to one department, but may work on several projects. Now you can see in this statement, it is describing the relationship between employee entity with project entity, and it is saying an employee may work on several projects. So it is 1:m side, right? 1:m. So m side is project, one side is again employee. So it is 1:m, right? So we have got the clear idea about the relationship between department with project, employee with department, employee with project, right? Okay. So which, okay, now continue reading it. Which are not necessarily controlled by the same department. So it is not that much important. We keep track of the current number. Okay, now it is saying we keep track of the current number of hours per week that an employee work on each project. So this is something important. So you need to have some kind of provision through which you can monitor the number of hours, because one employee is working on more than one projects, and he can have different number of hours with different number of projects. So it is important to keep track of the number of hours one employee is spending on one project on the different project, right? We also, so these are something for which you will be creating a different attribute. So you can say, let me find out number of hours per week, right? So this could be also a attribute, and you need to decide where you will be assigning this attribute, which entity will be having this attribute, right? We also keep track of the direct supervisor each of the employee. Now direct supervisor of the employee, this is something you need to understand. This is something you will be defining as an attribute, but you have to identify that this attribute will be placed on which entity, will be deriving from which table or which entity, right? Because it is important to keep track of these things, right? So I think till this point things are clear. Now last requirement, we want to keep track of the dependents. So dependent is something like for you, you dependent on you dependent on your father. So for your parents record, or maybe in the parents database, or wherever your parents are working in office, they have describe you as a dependent. So similarly, we need to keep track of the possible dependent of the dependent of employee. So now dependent is something which could be a potential what you can say entity, right? So let me clear it properly. Okay, yeah. So dependent is a possible entity. Now it says we want to keep track of the dependent of each employee for insurance purpose. Naturally, purpose is to provide the insurance coverage. Now we keep each dependent's first name. So now this is the possible attribute for the dependent: is gender, dependent's birth date, and dependent's relationship with the employee, right? So yeah, let me try again. Okay, so these are the possible attributes of a dependent of the dependent entity, right? Now if you read carefully this statement, it is possible that some of the employee will have multiple dependents, or some will have none, something like that, right? It is so because it is not clearly mentioned that it will be of nature 0 or it will be of nature m, so something like that. So basically from the broad description, the relationship between employee will be of nature again 1:m, right? So one employee can have more than one dependent. So that's what we are assuming. right? So now, so broadly we have identified the possible entities, their possible attributes and tentative relationship. So based on reading these, after reading these instructions, you can have a partial idea about the possible relationship between different entities. So broadly, how many entities we have? We have broadly identified department, project, employee, and dependents. So four entities we have clear with, right? Now, for each entity, we have identified the possible set of attributes. Now, can you identify the possible attributes which could act as a primary key for each entity? Can you do that? So you can mention here, you can add here the possible set of or possible attribute for each entity. You can comment in the chat box for each entity the possible set of attributes, possible attributes. Yeah, you can post here. So I am waiting for that. So let's take at least 15 seconds to take it and note it down, that which attribute may act as a primary key. So primary key is something that should be unique, and it should be available there for each object in that entity. So let's take employee. So for employee, at least there should be this value which could be unique, and it could be available for each object in that entity, right? So for employee, it is obviously clear, it is SSN number. Ishan is saying employee. For department, it is department number. It is okay. Now you can go for, okay, keep posting the answers. Keep posting all answers. I'm looking at the answers. Now, I hope you are clear with the, yeah. So you are clear with the entity, how to identify entity, how to identify attributes, how to identify the possible relationship and its name, relationship names and their cardinality ratios, right? So yes, there are a lot of things yet to be discussed, right? So let me drag down the one possible ER diagram for the above requirements. Okay, so let me slightly reduce the size of representation. I want to keep the requirements in the same page. Actually, I am trying to do that. Okay, I think it is partially available. So is it visible? These names are visible to you? These names, attributes name? I hope it is visible. To my screen, it is visible. Second screen, I hope it is visible. So you can confirm if it is perfectly visible. Okay. So Ishan is saying it is visible to you. Now I'm starting with the entities. Now you can easily spot or easily identify that employee is one entity which is clearly visible. Second entity is department. It is clearly visible. Now we have project, right? This is the third entity which we have identified, and one entity which is dependent. It is on the bottom. So in this ER diagram, these are the four entities which we have identified also, right? It means we have applied the correct way of describing or understanding the requirements actually. Yes. So let me partially place in a proper way. Okay. So as far as now, after verifying the entities, the next step is to verify the attributes and the possible set of attributes for primary key, because having primary key or defining primary key is one of the important tasks in ER diagram. So after identifying entity, the next task is to identify the proper attribute set. For employee, you can see SSN is a primary key. SSN is a primary key and it is written with underlined text, right? So SSN is written with underlined description. Now after that, the birth date is there, then first the name here. So in name, you can see on the name column we have further split it into three description: first name, middle initials and last name. So this is something. So whenever we use this kind of expression, that name is further divided or split it into fields, it means the name field or name attribute is called composite, because it can be composed by using, or it is composed by using more than one description. So that's why we see these attributes as a compose attribute. Similarly, address is address, right? Address could be also composed of like house number, street number, state, district, and something like that. So, but here the address is not split into further fields. So for employee, address could be one field. His salary is also, because it is explicitly mentioned on the requirements. Further, there is gender column. Now if you go for department, you can have idea about name, department name, department number, and location, right? Now you can easily ask, sir, where is this particular employee who will be managing? So where is the name of employee who will be managing it? Where is the start date column? Where is this column of location, right? So we will be discussing it and discussing how basically these values are moving to or moving, right? So now after this department, we can see project. So for project entity, we have this attribute name, project name basically, which is a project number and project location. So these three are very clear for the project. Similarly, for the dependent, we can have his dependent name, his gender, his birth date, and relationship, right? So this is about attribute. Now you can see the possible description of relationship, right? So let me first take out to the relationship between employee and dependent. So employee and dependent are related with 1:m. You can see 1:m relationship. So here we have mentioned the cardinality ratio. It is 1, and here it is n, right? So one employee could be having more than one dependent. That's what it is described. Similarly, if you see employee and project, employee and project, so it is obviously of nature m:n, because in requirement it is written that one employee can work upon more than one projects, right? So there will be different number of employees working on different number of projects. So that's why it is m:n. Now similarly there is an employee who works for a department. So there will be multiple employees who will be working in the department, right? So this is what about. So multiple employees are working in one department. Similarly, if you see, because there is a description in the requirement that one employee will be managing department. So it is of nature 1:1, because there will be only few employees, and among these few, each employee will manage only one department. So this is kind of managing the department relationship. You can read this instruction that it said a particular employee who manages the department. So basically this statement or part of statement is something for describing this relationship. Employee manages the department, right? So this part describes this relationship 1:1. Now there is the relationship instance between department and projects, and this is described by one department will control multiple projects. It is of 1 to n nature, right? So we have described all the possible relationship names and their ratio. Now last thing is there is a relationship. You can see employee, supervision, and employee. So this is something we have mentioned in the previous lecture, that there is a possible case of recursive relationship, and this relationship is happening because there is a requirement written in the employee part where it is asked to have the supervisor. Now you can read this part, that an employee works, no, for this is not, for this part is something because of which recursive relationship happening. This I have just shaded out down, and let me color also. Let me color with green. Okay, so this green line, this green statement, we also keep track of the direct supervisor of each employee. Now, because of this statement, we are getting this self relationship. So self relationship describing employee is supervisor of some other employee, something like that. So you cannot have another entity involved in this relationship. To keep track of this relationship or this description, we will be having an employee entity at both end. Because जो supervisors होंगे, जो हमने बात की थी लेक्चर में कि whenever we want to define a CR, class monitor or class representative, we have to identify one or two student or three student among the list of students. So it is basically designating these two or three students as CR to the other remaining students. So whenever we want to define relationship between CRs with students, we have to arrange both sides the list of students. Here also suppose we have 100 students, here we have 100 students. So now from the this side relationship where we have these 100 students, here also we are having 100 students. Now out of these 100, we have identified these three as a CR, and these three are will be mapped with this side of, so here the instance of a student will be considered as a student, here the instance of a student will be considered as a supervisor. So now in this side of the student instance, the objects inside this entity will act as a student, that is clear. But when he use these same set of values in this side, so all the students are now assume that supervisors or CRs, but out of these 100, only 3 will act as a CRs, and we can easily define the relationship that this CR will be looking into these first 20 or maybe 50, or this CR will be acting for CRs for 30, something like that. Similarly, in the case of employee, we will have two instances of employee entity, this side and this side, but this side instance or this side entity of employee will act as employee. All are employee primarily, सभी लोग पहले employee होते हैं, उसके बाद वो दूसरे position पे जाते हैं. But this side list of objects in the employee entity will act as a supervisor. So that's why we have self-referencing, because employee, so both side it is employee. Now this relationship often referred as a recursive, because employee is referring to employee, right? But the purpose of this self-referencing relationship, recursive relationship, is to describe that there are some employees who are acting as a supervisors for supervisors to other employer, supervisors for the other employer, right? So this is all about describing the relationship, their cardinality ratio. Now we are going to see the last aspect of the ER diagram, and which is why we have kept these start date, number of employees, number of hours, right? Why we are having these attributes on the relationship? Why, right? So this is depend upon your understanding. This is depend upon your expertise, that how much comfortable you are keeping with. Eventually, when we will be implementing or designing a database for this ER diagram, we will be placing these attributes like start date, number of employee, number of hours into some kind of entities. या तो वो basic entity पे जाएगा, project में जाएगा, जैसे number of hours है, so number of hours को आप place करेंगे project में, right? Because why we are keeping this into the project entity? Because basically it is coming because of this MS2N relationship, right? Because this is coming to MS2N relationship. Similarly, in case of this employee to department relationship, we will have start date thing. So because here we have 1:1 relationship, so we can place this attribute in either in department or in employee. But it is, if you read the instruction, it is requested that we keep track of the start date. So because it is asking, it is discussing about department, so we can keep this start date with department, right? So in ERD, actually, these kind of attributes must be appearing, and you can write it also. But eventually, you should be have a clear idea about that. This attribute will be going to add in the one of the entity, right? So it is not necessary to write, or it is not recommended even to write something on the relationship. You cannot add attribute on the relationship because sometimes it creates confusion, right? So it is widely advised to have all the attributes placed on the entity. That is one part. And basically, if you are having something that, okay, I'm not sure with that, which this attribute must go with which entity, which participating entity in the relationship, you can easily place attribute on the relationship. That's it. So I think with this, we have a clear idea about basically how to define, how to create a ERD of a given requirement set. Now, there is something additional which we have not discussed in the previous class, that how to indicate, why we are having this double diamond box in this relationship, and why dependent is defined as a weak entity here. So in this ER diagram, a dependent entity is a weak entity. And why it is, can you respond to that? Why dependent is a weak entity? Yes, I'm waiting for your answer. Anyone? Why this dependent entity is a weak entity in this relationship? Yes, I'm waiting for your answers. You can respond to the answers. So Mehul says dependent would be there if there would be an employee. Yes, right. It is clearly written in the requirements also. If you read, we want to keep track of the dependents of each employee for insurance purpose, right? So it is for some purpose. So whenever we have an entity which is there for a purpose, like in case of college, we have discussed that there could be an entity like scholarship, training and placement, right? So it is for some purpose. Training, TNPO is keeping track of your details for placement purpose. But if a particular student opted for no placement choice, that entity is not mandatory for, I mean, it is not mandatory for all students. It is up to, or it is based on some choices. So if any student, any employee is not having any dependent, so that entity does not have any significance to him. That's why basically this dependent is primarily defined as a it is defined primarily on the, or on maybe based on some purpose, right? So that is for clear that dependent is having this optional kind of existence in this ER diagram or in this whole database, because it is not applicable, it is not mandatory for each and every object on which it is dependent, right? So that's why it is mentioned in the double diamond box, right? For dependent, this name is a, it is a considered, because dependent is a weak entity. It means this name attribute of dependent is called as a weak key, weak primary key, because this dependent entity itself is a weak entity. So his primary key will be a weak entity key or weak key, right? So one thing you have to note down, that whenever we will be designing the database for this ER diagram, whenever we will be mapping this into the logical schema, we will be creating a separate table. That is obviously with the dependent name itself, right? But उसमें जो प्राइमरी की होगा वो ये होगा कि नेम, ये जो नेम लिखा हुआ है डिपेंडेंट नेम, और हम उसमें से क्या करेंगे कि जिस भी एंटिटी पे डिपेंडेंट है, एम्प्लॉय पे डिपेंडेंट है, तो एम्प्लॉय का प्राइमरी की भी हम यहाँ लेंगे. Whenever we will be mapping this weak entity into the tables, we will be basically creating the primary key by combining the name, which is the weak key, and the primary key of dependent entity, which is employee, right? So it will be having SSN and name. right? So that is kind of rule actually. Now, one last thing which you can notice carefully, if you can notice that we are having this double rows here between employee and department for the relationship work for. These lines are double lined actually, double line here, right? From this department, between employee and department for relationship managed, there is only this side, but between department and employee we have both side this double line. Similarly, between department and project, between or from project side we have double line. Similarly here, similarly here. So for some relationship there is a uh, single line notations, right? So it is to indicate two aspect, right? And that aspect is called total participation. So it is something we will be discussing on the next lecture, right? So total participation is something, let me hint it out. Total participation is something that एक रिलेशनशिप में दो एंटिटी इन्वॉल्व हैं अगर, और उसमें एक रिलेशनशिप डिफाइंड है, तो अगर आपको ये क्लियर है कि इस साइड का इंस्टेंस जो कि एम्प्लॉय है, एम्प्लॉय एंटिटी के सभी ऑब्जेक्ट्स अगर उस रिलेशनशिप में पार्टिसिपेट कर रहे हैं, so from this employee side entity, this entity is totally participating into the relationship. तो entity से लेके relationship के boss तक it will be double line, right? That is clear. Similarly, if you see in this relationship, all the objects of this side entity is having at least one participation, right? Then it will be total from this side as well. तो अगर आप इसमें इस डायग्राम में क्लियरली आप देखो, तो वी हैव दिस टोटल पार्टिसिपेशन फ्रॉम एम्प्लॉय इन द रिलेशनशिप वर्क फॉर, एंड फ्रॉम डिपार्टमेंट साइड आल्सो इट इज शोइंग total participation to the relationship works for. It means all the employees in the company are working for some department. That's what it means. From this side department, all the departments having participation. So company जितने भी departments हैं सभी का participation इसमें है, इस relationship में है. Similarly, if you describe department and projects relationship, we are having total participation from the project side. It means what? If project entity is participating in totality, all the project numbers, because project entity में project numbers ही होंगे, अलग-अलग projects होंगे बहुत सारे. So if it is having full participation or total participation from project side in relationship control with department, what does it mean? Yes, you can post your reply. What does it mean? Yeah, post your answer. What does it mean? I'm waiting for your answers. Yes, anyone? One or two or three answers. If we are having total participation from project, what does it mean? What does it mean? Anyone?
Sir,
I'm audible or not?
yes, sir. Yes.
Each project is associated with some department, right? All projects are controlled by somewhere. No, that's obviously clear. Shobha has written something. All projects are controlled by some department. But the description of this total participation from project entity means each and every project is controlled by each and every project. So we have maybe 5-6 projects. So these projects, each project is controlled by some department. That is very simple. No project will be isolated. But अगर ऊपर से देखो आप department से, from department entity side, it is shown only single line, which means there are some projects who are not controlling. There are some departments actually, not projects. There are some departments in the department entity. In the department entity, we have 4-5 departments in the organization, in the company, but there are some departments who are not having any projects, who are not controlling any projects. So from department side, it is partial participation. It is not total, right? So that's why it is indicated or it is mentioned with the single line here. it is represented as single line here, you can see. ठीक है. So ये जो डबल रोज और सिंगल रोज है, इसका केवल पर्पस ये है to indicate that how each object in the entity, how each object in the table of the department of the project is participating in that relationship. वो तो हमने कह दिया कि सर 1:n है और समथिंग लाइक दैट, दो वो उसको और क्लियर करने के लिए वी कुड यूज दिस थिंग. और जो अभी हम बात कर रहे हैं टोटल पार्टिसिपेशन और पार्शियल पार्टिसिपेशन, दीज आर कॉल्ड स्ट्रक्चरल कंस्ट्रेंट. These are called structural constraint. वो हम नेक्स्ट क्लास में और अच्छे से क्लैरिफाई करेंगे आपको. ठीक है. So with this definition you can easily identify that how each entity is participating in the relationship. कार्डिनलिटी रेशियो एक था जो हमने कह दिया कि 1:m और 1:m, m:m है, 1:n है. सो वो एक एस्पेक्ट है. बट अगर आपको और क्लैरिफाई करना है कि कौन सी एंटिटी का हर एक ऑब्जेक्ट इसमें मैप्ड है और यूज हो रहा है, so by using this notation you can simply indicate, right? So this is how you can map. Now you can easily map each and every information mentioned in a data requirement in a diagram. Now by looking at this diagram as a database designer or maybe as a database administrator, DBA, you can easily create a database for the company, right? So ऐसा नहीं है, अभी एक स्टेप और बचता है, which is basically how to map ERD into logical schema, which we will be discussing in probably in the last lecture or maybe in the next week lecture. But till now things are clear that how you can identify the possible entities in a given requirement and different elements, right? So I hope things are clear now. Now let me move to a different instruction जो हम बार पिछले क्लासेस से लेते रहे हैं. So this is something which we have discussed in the previous classes also. Let me mark. Yeah. So let me increase the size also. I hope it is readable now. Now the requirement was like a database is being constructed to keep track of the teams and games of a sport league. A team has a number of players, not all of whom participate in each game. Right. So now you can see this phrase, not all of whom participate in each game. तो जब आप कहेंगे कि सर there is a relationship between player and game entity, and so what is the participation between player and game? So you can say it is a partial, because not all players are playing in a game, because in game entity will have various instances like game number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, something like that. But in particular game we will not have participation of each player, right? So in some cases, in some requirements, these kind of information are used to be given, but it is not necessary to provide these kind of details. So requirement जब आप read करेंगे तो आपका अपना भी कुछ अंडरस्टैंडिंग रहेगा, एंड फॉर दैट यू नीड टू मेंशन आल्सो. जब आप एक रिक्वायरमेंट को ईआरडी में मैप करेंगे और कहेंगे कि सर आई एम यूजिंग टोटल पार्टिसिपेशन कंस्ट्रेंट आल्सो, तो आपको लिखना पड़ेगा, राइट? नाउ आफ्टर दीज थिंग्स इट इज डिजायर्ड टू कीप ट्रैक ऑफ द player participating. Okay, these are the things. Okay, so one of the possible ERD is this for given requirement. I think ये requirement हमने पिछले 3 lectures ली है, तो ये clear होना चाहिए कि कैसे किया होगा. This is one of the ERD, possible ERD. It has team, it has players, it has game. So it has primarily 3 entities drawn. For each entity, it has derived the possible attributes, make their attributes as a primary key possible thing. Similarly, it has this kind of relationship that team belongs to a player, team playing a game, and a relationship between game itself, home team on guest team, I don't know what. So this is taken from the internet. So if you post this requirement into the internet or Google search Google image search, it will provide this DFD as well as this DFD, right? So it because people have designed or drawn these DFDs, these ERDs actually on the internet, and they have uploaded I don't know, based on their understanding. So out of these three, only one ERD is correct, which is capturing all the possible requirements, which is keeping track of all the possible requirements mentioned in this, right? So there are some aspects which are missing in this DFD, in this ERD. So based on the requirement, if I draw a ER diagram, in this ER diagram, if I compare, there are few things which are not possible to, which are not designed actually, which are not drawn into this DFD, right? So that you have to see. I will be sharing this. This is a class note actually, so I will be sharing these class notes with you. Now, after looking at the class notes, you need to identify or you need to spot that which particular thing is not captured in the CRD. So because requirement is of hardly two statements, there are three possible entities. There are few things like it is desired to keep track of the players. Now, for this, like in the previous case, previous requirements, there are some things which are written that this should be keep track of. For this, you have to read something. So for these kind of things, you can create directly attribute, right? So after reading these two lines of requirements, I hope you will be able to find out the possible missing points, possible missing thing in the ER diagram. So we have three possible ERDs. This is the first one. Second, we have this representation. This is what the third one. So out of these three, only one particular DFD, one particular ERD is capturing all the possible requirements written in the statements, right? So that you have to do, and you can see that there are three individuals who tried for mapping these requirement statement into the different equivalent ERDs, right? So now I'm stopping sharing this content. Now, so one thing I want to share that it is not possible to have this one unique ER diagram for a given requirement. So because in the past experiences also I can say that whenever we used to give the question in the examination, like for this scenario you have to draw a ER diagram, there are possibly 100 or maybe 90. So if class have around 100 students, during the final examinations we used to get around 95 different ER diagrams, right, for the same requirements, right? The difference only is on the possible attributes and how they define the relationship, because cardinality should be there. So for each student the cardinality is similar. Cardinality ratio means relationship ratio is similar or same. For entity name could be the same for all students. This relationship ratio could be the same for each student, and probably some for some around first 70 to 80, 90% cases attribute namings are also similar. But there are some possible requirements that needs to be built in the system. That is what is different in the all answer sheets. So each and every student understand these requirements जो आपको सिस्टम में बिल्ड करनी होती है डेटाबेस में, और वो रिक्वायरमेंट्स के लिए जो आप एट्रीब्यूट डिफाइन करते हैं वहाँ डिफरेंस होता है. दैट इज द ओनली डिफरेंट पार्ट which creates a difference between 2 or 3 or maybe the best student or best ERD and the worst ERD, right? So it means you after identifying the basic details, the next part which is important to see is the requirement. जो सिस्टम में requirements built होनी है, जो सिस्टम डिलीवर करेगा, तो उस पे आपको केयरफुल रीड करके डिजाइन करना है, राइट? सो मे बी टुमारो और मे बी next classes I will be sharing the different assignments